Okay, well, let's get started. I think we've got a good group of people here, and I just want to say thank you everybody for joining us today, June 11th, for the role of the solar and clean energy in an economic recovery in these really challenging times. So my name is Brooke. I'm a state delegate representing District 46, along with my teammates, delegates Robin Lewis and Luke Klibinger, and State Senate President Bill Ferguson. I'm delighted to be here. We represent District 46, but of course we pass policies that impact the entire state, and including, of course, solar and clean energy policies. So, you know, I host these webinars during this challenging time because I think being an elected official is about more than passing legislation. And I'm really excited to have a great panel today to talk about the importance of the solar industry in an economic recovery, how we can create jobs, how we can connect consumers to local solar energy options. So many people here who know so much. They're really the top in their field about all of this work. Before we begin the panel, just a couple notes. I really believe that government is about reducing barriers to success and creating opportunities, and of course, keeping our residents safe. And as we find ourselves in the midst of this great public health crisis, you know, I think one of the things that I go back to a lot is that this pandemic is a great storm, and we are all in the same storm, but we are not all in the same boat. And many of us have boats that are weathered and full of holes because of a variety of reasons: systemic racial oppression, long-term racism, you know, people who are older who haven't gotten what they need, or the health or lack of healthcare access. And of course, also people who live in really polluted communities, right? Who do not have access to clean energy or solar energy options. Even those who live in my own district, here in Baltimore City, we have some very dirty energy producers and an incinerator that burns trash and causes higher rates of heart disease and asthma in many places of Baltimore City. We know that places where that happens are largely areas of our under-resourced communities where many people of color live. And so, you know, I'm a huge believer in pushing solar and clean energy technology so that we can clean up our air, so that people are stronger when pandemics and other great issues hit. So I'm really thrilled to have the group here today. So why a webinar on solar energy and the economic recovery? Well, there's a really interesting poll that just came out by Gonzales, Maryland, that CCAN commissioned, and it found that both Republicans and Democrats want the Public Service Commission to move faster on wind and solar projects as a source of jobs during this recession. 64% of the 810 respondents think that the PSC should speed up the process, work faster, because, and it's amazing, it's Democrats.
Can others hear Brooke, or is it just my audio?
It cut out for me as well. She froze for me too.
Okay, let's give it 1 minute, and if it doesn't resolve, I will just keep us moving forward.
Will do.
Okay, it looks like she got booted out, so I'm gonna continue the intro until she gets back on. So as Brooke was, sorry, I'm Danny, I'm Brooke's legislative director. I'll put my video on here 1 second. Sorry, there we go. So as Brooke was saying, this poll came out just earlier this week, I believe, that showed that 64% of the 800 respondents think that the PSC should speed up the process and act faster in dealing with solar energy and wind projects that it's considering. Democrats and Republicans and independents polled almost exactly the same on this issue. The results were also very comparable by region. In Western Maryland, the Eastern Shore, Baltimore City and County, and the Washington metro area all supported speeding up the process. So with 500,000 Marylanders newly unemployed and 40 solar projects and 3 wind farms waiting in these pipelines, it makes sense to us that, you know, people agree that the PSC should act faster. So we felt this is a great time to talk more in depth about this. And as Brooke mentioned, have some experts with us here today. So I'm going to kick us off or kick it over to Cyrus to get us started. Cyrus is the president of Open Road Renewables and the chairman of Maryland's Utility Scale Solar Energy Coalition, or the USSEC. Cyrus has been working on developing solar farms in Maryland since early 2010 and has had a hand in hundreds of solar projects currently under development, construction, and operations across the state. Prior to co-founding Open Road Renewables, Cyrus successfully led the solar development business at Pioneer Green Energy, where he managed development of hundreds of solar projects from California to Maryland. He previously worked on solar and wind projects with climate and renewables in Air City. So Cyrus, I'm going to kick it over to you to start. Thank you.
Thanks, Danny, and really appreciate your work and Delegate Learman's leadership and the opportunity to present here. Just one correction, is hundreds of megawatts, not hundreds of projects. I wish I had
sorry.
the opportunity to work on that many projects. There was a slide deck, and maybe that'll pop up at some point, but I'll go with
I can try to share my screen while we get.
No problem. So as Danny mentioned, USEC member companies develop utility scale solar facilities in Maryland. Utility scale refers to projects that are 2 megawatts or larger that connect to transmission lines. So what is a megawatt? A megawatt is about 6 to 10 acres of ground mounted solar. A megawatt can power around 200 Maryland homes. And a megawatt's enough solar in Maryland to displace about 1,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide per year. So we wanted to answer the question of the potential number of jobs and local revenue that are in solar projects that are currently under development in the state. And to answer that question, we used some publicly available data from the regional grid operator, PJM. And so what is PJM? PJM stands for Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Maryland, and it's a regional transmission organization that manages the electric grid and the power market across 14 states, including Maryland. And one of their roles is to, if you go 2 more slides, you'll catch up here.
Perfect.
There you go. One of their roles is to manage how new generators like our solar farms safely and reliably interconnect to the transmission system. Transmission refers to 69 kV or higher. These are the really big lines. That's in contrast to the distribution system, which is below 69 kV, which is where community solar, rooftop solar projects connect, which are regulated by individual utilities. And we'll hear more, I think, on this call about those segments of the industry. So for prospective generators like us to connect to the transmission system, we have to submit applications to a sequential queue managed by PJM, and that application kicks off like a 3+ year study process before we have the right to interconnect. And that PJM queue is actually publicly available. There's a website you could go look up, play with yourself. So next slide, please. So how many projects are in that PJM queue, and how many megawatts is that? In Maryland, there are currently 45 projects under study that are not either operating or under construction in the PJM queue. That's as of mid-April when we ran the numbers. Those projects total 1,684 megawatts. That translates to about 15,000 acres of land. For context, Maryland has around 8 million acres of land, and about 2.2 million acres of that is ag land. So 1,684 megawatts is about 3 times what is currently, utility scale wise, what's currently either operating or under construction in Maryland. That's enough to power about 337,000 homes and to annually displace about 1.6 million metric tons of CO2 per year. So it's a big number. Because it takes a long time to work through this PJM queue, you can really think of this as the theoretical maximum potential utility scale solar build in Maryland over the next 5 years. So next slide, please. So what does that mean in terms of jobs? It takes 5 to 7 years from the original queue application to PJM for a project to come online in Maryland. And also these projects that are in the queue, some of them applied back in 2015, some of them as recently as this year. So to figure out the jobs number, we created a representative single year jobs profile for a solar project. And then based on the application date, we stacked them across all 45 projects, and to get to a good estimate by year. We also used a standard multiplier to capture indirect and induced jobs. I will note that this just focuses on these 45 projects. So if new projects are coming into the queue over the course of within this 5-year window that we're looking at, that will be additional to these estimates. Next slide, please. So here's a quick glance on the next slide at the employment profile that we put together. You can kind of see the jobs really start ramping up as you get closer to construction. And then during construction, there are a lot of jobs for a year, and then they ramp back down to a small number of jobs for a very long time, 25 to 40 years. And on the next slide, you can add up all the jobs and see the net employment impact by year, estimated by just these 45 projects, looking at, if you're on the phone, but in 2020, 2021, approaching 3,000 jobs in aggregate, and then onward from there. It's noteworthy that this doesn't count the other sectors in the solar industry, community solar, distributed solar. This is just 45 projects in the PJMQ, utility scale projects. On the next slide, you can see that we did a similar approach to answer how much direct tax revenue to localities these projects could represent. Once they're operational, they spend a lot of money annually in direct payments to counties and municipalities. In some counties, they may be the largest taxpayer or among the largest taxpayers once they're online. And that really doesn't include other economic benefits like the investment itself, the wages, the landowner payments, or other indirect or induced payments. On the next slide, you can see the kind of conclusion here, which is the current utility scale solar projects under development represent a big opportunity for economic development, for tax revenue, 3,000 jobs over the next 24 months, potentially. Tax payments of 11 million per year by 22, almost 20 million per year by 26. This does assume that projects are able to attain their permits without delay, and that is unfortunately not a safe assumption these days. So currently many of these projects are delayed or will be delayed due to a messy overlap between how Maryland manages the state and local permitting regimes. For example, the average time for a solar permitting application to go through the state process right now is about 1.5 years, sometimes much longer than that. And that's really double the historic time. So we're really focused on policies that are designed to expedite permitting and enable projects like these to progress and future projects to progress, which would really, bring home these jobs and the tax revenue, as well as the environmental benefits of more solar on the Maryland grid. So with that, I don't know if Delegate Learman, you're back, but thanks again and look forward to any questions.
Sorry about that. That's how it goes sometimes with Zoom.
No worries.
Thank you. Thanks for bearing with me, and thanks, Danny, for stepping in. Great. We're going to turn it over to Rachel. Rachel Smucker, who joined MDV SEIA. Do you say that somehow? I couldn't figure out how to make those letters sound like something, so I just said all of the letters. But she's the Policy and Development Manager, and she is responsible for implementing legislative and regulatory campaigns related to the state-level solar energy policy in Virginia and growing and managing membership all over. So great. Thank you so much for joining us. Rachel's going to talk a little bit about the impact that COVID has had on the industry and why solar is shovel ready and why it's crucial for states to invest. So thanks for joining us, Rachel.
Yeah, thanks so much, Delegate Learman, for hosting this webinar and having me on. We're grateful for your continued support and advocacy for clean energy and equity policies in Maryland. As the delegate said, my name is Rachel Smucker, and I'm the Policy and Development Manager for MDV-SEIA, the Regional Solar Trade Association covering the DMV area. We have the honor of representing members like Jen from Clean Energy Choice and Cyrus from Open Road Renewables, two of my fellow panelists today. So most of our members are actively engaged in Maryland and Virginia, and this shouldn't be too much of a surprise, particularly for Maryland, because the Maryland market was one of the earliest proponents of strong solar policy. So as the delegate said, I'm going to provide just a quick snapshot of where the industry is right now, and then talk a little bit about why we are in one of the best positions to pull us out of this economic downturn. So clean energy employment has certainly been a bright spot in the economy in recent years. Pre-COVID-19, solar jobs outnumbered coal jobs almost 3 to 1. But the pandemic has definitely forced that growth trajectory to scale back significantly. Right now, in fact, the solar industry is losing jobs at a faster rate than the overall US economy. Since the end of February, the industry has had to cut around 65,000 jobs as a direct result of COVID-19. And this is essentially, or will essentially negate 5 years of solar industry growth, pushing the workforce back to 2014 levels. Here in Maryland, our job losses are right around 2,800 jobs, and that represents around 55% of the state's industry. In addition, we've also seen the number of megawatts deployed decrease since the pandemic has taken over. So we're seeing a drop of sales and some other delays like permitting. Cyrus talked a little bit about that earlier. Despite these losses, however, the solar industry is poised to play a critical role in our economic recovery, both at the state and federal level, and is really in the ideal position to pull us out of this downturn. Earlier this spring, the Department of Homeland Security issued an advisory memo that recommends which workers are considered essential. The solar industry was covered on several counts. The Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency deemed workers supporting energy infrastructure like solar workers as essential, as well as roofers and electricians who perform similar work to our solar installers. Because solar workers are defined as essential, solar projects have been able to continue business as usual with the addition of COVID-19 safety guidelines and best practices. The reason why our industry is suffering job losses right now is because of this economic downturn. Homeowners and businesses are cautious about investing in solar right now, and we are seeing some delays in permitting and inspection processes as localities are figuring out how to transition those processes into a virtual format or an online format. Similarly, if the county is not able to perform these processes virtually, then we're also seeing roadblocks there. The project won't be able to move forward. So it's really essential that we have both state, local, and federal support to ensure that clean energy infrastructure is prioritized in the various state and federal relief packages. And we're really taking a look at even some of the local processes that may be putting some roadblocks in the way of building out these projects. The point of all of this is that our projects are shovel ready right now and will continue to provide a crucial source for job creation and economic growth as we move forward. And in Maryland in particular, the ratepayer dollars that go into the solar RPS are returned to the state 5 to 1. The SEEF dollars, the Strategic Energy Investment Fund dollars, actually get reinvested into things like grid benefits, labor benefits, and generate state tax revenue. So while COVID-19 has certainly changed our entire landscape, one thing that has remained constant is the fact that solar represents a smart investment, both for Maryland and also for the country at large.
Great. Thank you. Thanks so much. Now I'm excited to have Wellington Ash here. If you are in Baltimore, you know Civic Works, which was founded by my colleague Dana Stein many years ago, and he's still the CEO there. And Wellington works with a specific part of Civic Works that does great work helping people prepare to work in the solar field. So Wellington, I'm really excited to hear from you about the program, how it works, and what you expect to see moving forward after the pandemic ends, or what's going on right now too. Thanks for joining us.
Well,
You have been, how long have you been? I know, sorry, I should look at this. You are the Associate Director of Training at Baltimore Civic Works Center for Sustainable Careers. So that's your actual title, which I should have given you. I was just so excited to have you on.
it is a pleasure to be here, and it's nice to be with you again. Hello, everyone. Yes, as she said, I am the Associate Director for Training at the Center for Sustainable Careers, where we do workforce development training, and it includes a large emphasis on the solar industry and solar installation. I'm loving the fact that we're talking about sustainable forms of energy and energy in general, because all of our training tracks focus on areas that either clean up the environment or help to preserve it in ways that, including utility infrastructure and weatherization, home energy efficiency. But today we're celebrating solar. We moved at-risk people, at-risk populations to a different status, a stabilized status, by training them for jobs that pay a living wage and allow them to participate in this green economy and the greening of our city, state, and country. It also, by definition and by practice, creates stakeholders that ordinarily would be so busy surviving day-to-day life that green energy and environmental awareness would be the least of their concerns. So we penetrate a market of a demographic where folks become educated and invested by their work and by the knowledge that they attain in industries that they may otherwise have been ignored or been shut out of. We serve 120 to 140 Baltimore City residents per year. We train them in the 3 disciplines that I had mentioned before. And we then, through public-private partnerships, place them with employer partners that we have cultivated. They include multiple solar companies, and the living wage is a big deal. We won't entertain placing our trainees in with companies that don't pay a living wage. Our trainees simply have to be 18 years or older. If they are previously justice involved, that is okay too. The partnerships that we have developed allow us to comfortably vet and not have our partners exclude people from employment that have been involved in the justice system. We are not by definition a reentry program, but we behave a lot like a reentry program because of our success. The word on the street is, if you go to Civic Works Center for Sustainable Careers and you train in one of our disciplines, you will get a job. And we'll talk about why that's the word on the street, because that's generally been the reality. And so folks who have been shut out, most shut out of employment and are underemployed, are those who've been justice involved. So they come to us in droves because people who've come through successfully over the 15 to 17 years that we've been in action vouch for us, and word of mouth is our greatest form of being publicized. As I said, we do solar installation, utility infrastructure, weatherization, home energy, public-private partnerships. Our 2018 outcomes include an enrollment of 117 folks at that time. Completion rate was 86%, and of that 86%, we placed 94%. 2015 to 2018, retention at 6 months was 73%. Retention at the year was 83%, and retention at 2 years was 92%. Now, when you hear those numbers, you go, why is retention at year 2 higher than year 1 and at 6 months? That's because what we've discovered is people may not succeed at their initial placement, or it may fall out, or the company may contract or whatever, but the training that they have received is viable and valuable and marketable. And so we find that our folks are employed at the 2-year level. We continue to track them as long as they stay in contact with us. But of course, grants generally require 2-year tracking. The wages at placement have averaged $15.57. Wages at 6 months, $16.06. Wages at year 1, $16.56, and wages at year 2, $17.58. As you can see, these are living wages as opposed to minimum wage. Is it enough? It's never enough, but the wages are ascending, and they do so steadily. And the longer that folks are retained, of course, the higher their wages become with experience. The way we do what we do, and why I think we have become a model, a national model, in fact, for workforce development, is that we provide case management, job placement, and team coaching, and we focus on barrier removal. The list of services and wraparound services that we provide is growing, and we are always expanding it in ways that benefit the trainees and make for a smoother transition and a more effective runway into employment. Our employment partnerships, of course, are key to this, and this means that we have folks waiting to employ our graduates when they're done with the program, as opposed to fill out a resume and apply to these companies and maybe you'll get a job.
Right.
So that's key. Industry recognized certifications, personal professional development, and employability skills. So we deal with the whole person and not just give them job training skills. We provide therapeutic interventions with our case managers, food stamp sign up for people who are transitioning and don't want to have to worry about food security while they're training, financial skills and literacy so that people know what to do with the money that they're going to make. Transportation, we provide bus passes and gas cards because unemployed and underemployed people generally don't have the money to get to wherever the job or training in this case are. MVA license restoration, tickets and fines and fees removal. We have a car match program where we help our trainees purchase vehicles so that they can have reliable transportation when they enter the job market.
Trained in how to deal with mental illnesses.
Health insurance sign up, clothing, help with clothing and well, for interviewing as well as everyday life. Housing help and referrals, even though emergency and transitional housing is a really difficult issue in Baltimore City and in Maryland in general. And of course, community mediation as well. So the combination of services that we provide along with the employer partnerships allow us to help folks who would ordinarily be shut out of employment get involved in the solar industry, and they become educated, of course, to technically as well as morally about the benefits of such industry transition. So we're very proud of our success and continue to move forward. As far as what the prospects are, we see that some of the solar companies are, of course, as Rachel, I guess, alluded to, they're in a holding pattern. Is not as much face-to-face or customer contact with solar installation, but people, of course, are cautious because of the economic downturn, more so than because of COVID at this point. So we are hearing good things from our employer partners about the prospects for a return to full-blown solar expansion. Hopefully, the state of Maryland can get legislation passed that will be similar to, the Solar for All initiatives that we've seen in DC, where low and moderate income folks can have access to solar, and that we can preserve the incentives for solar installation.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. And what an impressive program. It's a real model for programs across the country. Now I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer Spinozzi, who's the General Counsel and SVP of Regulatory and Compliance at Clean Choice Energy. She engages with external stakeholders to expand customers' access to renewable energy and ensures company compliance with all of those pesky regulations and laws that love to make. No. So thank you, Jennifer, for joining us today, and looking forward to hearing what you have to say about, especially about connecting consumers to local energy options.
Absolutely. Thank you, Delegate Learman, so much for the opportunity. I'm certainly honored to be a part of this, this wonderful panel. In addition to working at Clean Choice, I'm also on the board of directors for Rachel's organization, MDVCIA. So really, I've been put in a great position to be able to speak with some of our other counterparts in solar and to learn a little bit about what others, in addition to what Clean Choice is doing, but what some of the other Maryland-based companies are doing in response to COVID. So one thing that and just to give a little bit more background about Clean Choice, we're a DC-based renewable energy company. We empower both people and businesses to cut emissions, support renewable energy, and live cleaner lives. We do that through a direct sale of renewable energy in retail markets, which is really easy and convenient for customers. And then we also are a community solar provider. So we've been involved with the Maryland Community Solar Program since day one. We were a part of creating those consumer protection rules at the PSC, and I think Maryland has done a wonderful job of frankly setting the standard in terms of consumer protection that several other states have modeled. So I'll talk a little bit about that as well. But really what I wanted to dive into a little bit is this idea that there is such overwhelming support for solar and wind development in Maryland. But I think sometimes everyday consumers might not know, what actions they can take to support that work if they're not directly involved in the solar business. And fortunately, there are a lot of ways that customers can get involved. As Cyrus talked about earlier, there is kind of this interesting dynamic when it comes to siting and permitting, that some of that happens at the state level, but a lot of it also happens at local counties. So if you're interested in projects that are being considered for development in your area, you can go to those local county zoning meetings. You can go to public meetings and you can talk about your interest and support for solar. Solar companies really love to partner with their communities and to make sure that they're developing projects in a responsible way and that are in response to that community interest. Something else that we've started to see more recently in Maryland is developing community solar projects with pollinator-friendly habitat. That's a really, really exciting development. That adds in yet another layer of jobs. It also helps preserve, wildflowers and that pollinator. I personally have loved to see over the last couple of years more and more monarchs and other butterflies in the area. So it's really exciting to be able to kind of layer that feature in with our solar development. So that's something exciting that's happening in Maryland as well. And then I also wanted to talk a little bit about, I think, as Rachel said, the solar industry has really shown tremendous growth in jobs over the last several years, but COVID has also posed for us some specific challenges. And I've been really encouraged by the way that a number of solar and even energy efficiency companies are sort of pivoting their business and getting a little bit more innovative. Just a couple examples of that. I recently heard from an energy efficiency company that typically when they're doing an energy audit for customers, they send a technician to the door and the technician does the actual audit. They have actually created a protocol where customers can do that audit themselves via video. So they give the customer, a checklist in advance. They tell them, hey, you're going to need a tape measure. You're going to need a flashlight. Here are the areas of the home that we're going to go look at. And then literally just via a live Zoom or video call, just like this one, the technician walks the homeowner or renter right through that process. And they're able to qualify the customer for certain energy efficiency improvements. And then, Wellington addressed some of the job training and the excellent work that Civic Works is doing there. So I won't get into that. But then the other thing that we're also seeing is really companies like mine or companies that are in the rooftop solar space that traditionally are having in-person sales consultations with customers are looking for new ways to reach customers. They're exploring doing virtual sales via Zoom calls or via texting or via just a regular phone call. And so that's yet another way that, you know, solar companies are still looking to reach customers and are still looking to provide those services. But we're really seeing some innovation that was kind of forced by this pandemic situation.
That's great.
And I'm just reasonably, you know, I'm optimistic that we are going to see a recovery here. The jobs numbers that Cyrus presented are so compelling. And I think that we, you know, Maryland is really well positioned to kind of get through this period and then really get back to our job growth in solar.
Cool. That's great. You know, it's a really interesting industry and just provides so many benefits in a lot of different ways. So we had a few questions that were submitted that I'd love anybody's feel free to jump in on them. There were a couple questions about community solar and what it means and how it works. And a couple people said, you know, I'm in a row house HOA, there's design restrictions, or I don't have space to do community solar. How can I join community solar? Do you want to talk just a little bit about how, you know, there are numerous companies that are now, not numerous, but several companies that are now offering community solar in Maryland. And Jennifer, you're one of them. Do you want to talk a little bit about what that means and how it doesn't really matter where you live? Like you can probably sign up.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for that question. So community solar is really designed to be a new business model that gives renters or those who don't have what we call a solar suitable roof, who can't put solar panels on their roof, to be able to access some of the same financial benefits and really to be able to support solar in the same way that someone would if they were putting solar panels on their roof. So the great thing about community solar is it's very easy to sign up. It typically is a longer term contract, but if the customer moves, they can usually get out of that contract without any type of penalty. And the pricing structure is almost always structured so that the customer is paying less than the value of the credits that they're receiving. So the way that it works is a little bit wonky, but I sort of liken it to buying a gift card or sort of buying something on Groupon. So when you sign up for community solar, what you're essentially doing is signing up to receive bill credits on your utility bill for a certain share of the solar that's produced on a solar farm. And then in return, you're going to pay your community solar company a separate fee. And typically customers are looking to save anywhere between 5 and 15%. So if you get $100 worth of credits on your utility bill, you're going to get a separate bill from your solar provider that's somewhere between $85 and $95 for those credits. And so one shout out I want to give is that the Maryland PSC was one of the first in the country that created a consumer protection framework around this. And one of the great things that they did was they created a industry-wide contract summary, so that on the first page of your community solar agreement, there's a standardized set of terms that customers can look at and very easily understand what's the price I'm going to pay, what's the term of this contract, is there an early termination fee, are savings guaranteed, what happens if I move, you know, all of those kind of just key terms of any contract. And that's a really excellent tool for customers. Another
great.
they can do is there's an entity called Solar United Neighbors, and they actually have a website where customers can search for either rooftop or also community solar offers. So if you want to know what community solar farms you might be eligible to sign up for, you can go to Solar United Neighbors, you can put in your information, and you can do a little bit of a comparison of offers. And
That's great.
farms that we have open now are also listed on that site.
That's great. Thank you for that. I just put the website in the chat box. So that's good. I didn't know about that website. So that's good to know as a place to send people. So thank you for that. A question about how can leaders in the movement interest big box retailers in adding both solar and greening to their roofs? The roof structures of this building type are certainly designed for no additional loading, so some kind of financial incentive might be necessary. So maybe, I don't know, Cyrus, you want to talk about a little bit about how much, the possibilities of using rooftop versus the need for some of the larger projects that are in the PJM, right? There's sort of, some of these are small projects like the rooftops, and then we're talking about very big projects when we talk about the PJM projects. You want to talk a little bit about some of the difference and some of the smaller ones?
Sure, happy to, and I'm sure, Jennifer, you might have more on it as well. When we kind of put the 10-year plan together over the last couple of years of how to grow the solar industry in Maryland as part of the renewable portfolio standard expansion, we did look at kind of what is the capacity in Maryland for community solar, for distributed generation, and for utility scale. And frankly, more than half of the solar we're projecting over the next decade is not utility scale solar. It's rooftops, it's behind the meter commercial rooftops, and it's community solar. So there are, I think that if I recall the numbers, projecting 250,000 rooftops by the end of the decade. Don't have the numbers right in front of me, but that's
Sure.
just from memory. So there's a lot of opportunity, and really we're expecting a minority of that to be out in utility scale projects. But Jennifer, I don't know if you have more.
What makes those projects like worthwhile, I guess? How do we get people to do them? Jennifer or Cyrus, either of you?
Sure. I think, one of the key incentives, particularly for rooftop solar in that context, is just the value of the SRECs and how much roof space there is available, and whether the projects can really pencil out just based on the financing that's available, based on the value of SRECs. And Maryland's done a pretty good job of bolstering that value recently, so that incentive level is appropriate. And it really is kind of just a fact specific or circumstance specific inquiry that building owners have to take some time to look at.
That's interesting. I remember seeing a chart. I think I was at Exelon on the trading floor, and they showed me what SRECs were trading for over the timeline, and you could see as soon as we passed the Clean Energy Jobs Act, right? Go, whoop, they're worth a lot more. And then again, it sort of like leveled out. And then when he didn't veto it, it stayed up. So it was, it's interesting to watch the value for sure. What are possibilities for job training and employment for underemployed Baltimoreans in this industry locally? Well, you've talked quite a bit about that. Do you want to talk a little bit about where some of the companies are that are hiring folks from your program, like what some of those companies are, where people end up working?
Yeah, what's been gratifying is to the extent that in this particular environment that there are things that are gratifying, is that that our solar trainees, our solar graduates, have by far and large remained employed. So the ongoing projects were there. The cohort that was just leaving us as the pandemic broke out is on hold, but they have prospects, and the companies are simply waiting to see what their prospects are, and when are we expecting a vaccine, how safe will it be, so that the public confidence that they can have folks working in and around their homes, because most of the companies we work with do residential solar, but we do those that have commercial as well. But I think everybody's kind of in a little bit of a holding pattern because of the uncertainty and the timing of it all, as opposed to the viability of the industry. So I don't think it's a matter of if, it's just a matter of when.
Yep, interesting. There was a question also about energy storage and whether we see energy storage linked to solar projects in Maryland. Do any of you want to talk a little bit about the importance of energy storage to making all of this work? Feel free.
I'm happy to mention, you know, not just in Maryland, but across the region as the price has gone down. We've seen a lot more, you know, storage integrated into solar farms, and also we're starting to see standalone storage as a competitor against, you know, gas peakers and
Interesting.
point sources of, or as a competitor against new transmission projects. So it's a really, really exciting, just the beginning of where the price is starting to make sense, where it would be more economic maybe to put a large storage facility, you know, 5-acre, couple 100-megawatt storage facility somewhere rather than build a new transmission line across a neighborhood or whatnot. So it's really, I couldn't say, you know, who's integrating it in Maryland, but just the opportunity to integrate a lot more renewables. One of the main obstacles to, you know, really getting more penetration of even offshore wind, but also solar in Maryland is the grid capacity, and storage is kind of the holy grail to solve that problem.
Okay. Yep. That makes sense. That makes sense. Well, we're going to
just to add
go ahead.
one more thought on for residential customers. Maryland is actually one of the few states that allows customers to qualify for a tax incentive if they buy a battery for their home, even if the customer doesn't have solar on their roof. So in some other states, you have to have solar in order, you know, it's kind of a tandem benefit. In Maryland, there is that unique ability for a battery as a standalone project. So we've seen some interest from our customers in batteries for, you know, home reliability and for managing through outages. And that's something that we're just starting to test, but there certainly is some opportunity and potential there for Maryland.
Yeah, oh, that's interesting. That is interesting. Well, why don't you, I'd love to have everybody just say sort of a final word if you'd like about, you know, where we are and how we move forward. And a huge thank you, all of you, for joining us today. Rachel, you want to start? Oh, you're on mute. Sorry, I caught you off guard.
No, it's okay. Can you?
Yep, there you go.
Okay, I think, oh,
Yep,
perfect. Awesome. Well, final last words. Solar industry is ready to get to work, and we are ready to be a part of the economic recovery. So I'll leave it at that.
That's great. Thanks. Jennifer?
Yeah, I think that we're finally seeing more convergence of a lot of climate activists' interests and a real coalescence around the importance of environmental justice and racial equality in climate activism. So we're really excited to see some of those forces come together, and we think that Maryland can lead the way on that work.
Thank you. Thanks for that. Wellington, any final thoughts? Oh, sorry.
There we go. Yeah, I would just say that please remain cognizant of supporting initiatives that impact the most vulnerable of us, especially in these times. You know, transportation systems and the implications thereof, fines and fees, removal and forgiveness for people who really can't afford them. They really become a poor tax. Emergency and transitional housing, expansion, and any initiatives that would impact those. Whereas we are really proud of our graduates and the progress that they're making in their lives, at this particular juncture in their existence, they are still amongst the most vulnerable, since they would be last hired. They are often first to be laid off. And in this particular environment we're in, please be mindful and sensitive of that in whatever your particular ways you might contribute to alleviating some of that.
Thank you. Well said. Thank you for that. And Cyrus.
I would just say, you know, while the industry constantly faces headwinds from, you know, the current administration, the utility scale solar industry in Maryland and in the region is in a unique position to be really just wanting to hire and not really needing money at the moment, and just really needing projects to be able to go into construction and permits. So That is maybe a fairly unique position. These are outside jobs. You're able to safely employ thousands of people across the region. It would be great to just streamline the ability to do that. So that's really where we are, and the opportunities, you know, couldn't be a better time to be hiring people right now if we can do it.
Yep.
So.
Thank you. Thanks for that. Thank you everybody so much for joining us today. Really excellent remarks, very informative, and I think everybody on learned a lot. I'm sorry about my technical difficulties in the beginning, but I'm glad we recovered. You didn't even need me at all to be here, see? I always like to end these with just a note of gratitude. Thank you for all of you for the work that you're doing, but also a huge thank you to all of those essential workers out there. We are all in our safe houses right now, and there are people on grocery stores and farm workers and transit drivers and others who are taking risks and who are often the most vulnerable among us. So I just like to make sure we keep them in mind when we do our work. So thank you to all of you for your work. Thanks for everything you do. Keep up the great work, and please stay safe and keep in touch. So take care, everybody. Thank you. Bye-bye.